Fremont. Right. Okay. All right. We're talking today with Mr. Al Walker of Zeeland, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of Grand Valley State University. Okay. Al, can you start by telling us a little bit about your own background? For instance, where were you born and when were you born?
I was born in Pontiac, Michigan, 1949,
Okay.
August 17.
All right. And then did you grow up there and go to school there?
Yes, I went through all my schooling there, Pontiac Central High School. After I got out of the service, I got my associate degree from Oakland Community College in law enforcement.
Okay. Now, when you're growing up in Pontiac, what did your father do? What was your family doing then?
My father, he worked in General Motors. He actually was one of the first black millwrights in General Motors, in the Pontiac plant. My mother also worked in Pontiac Motors. She worked in assembly.
Okay. And do you know when your parents started working there?
Oh, my goodness.
Was it back during the war, before you were born? Or?
It was before I was born, yes.
Okay. And what was it like growing up in Pontiac then, kind of into the 50s and early 60s?
It was relatively quiet town, busy town, when the plants were in full swing. I can remember going into downtown Pontiac around like the holidays, and they'd actually have policemen directing traffic at Saginaw and Huron because it was so busy. As time went on, you know, from having all like the movie theaters downtown Pontiac and bowling alleys downtown Pontiac, everything started moving out of the city. Sears, J.C. Penney's, all these type of stores moved over into Waterford where they built a big mall. So, of course, the downtown area started to, you know, deteriorate.
And when was that happening? How early did that start, do you think?
As I can remember, it was in the 60s. When I was in high school, before I graduated, I worked at what they call the state hospital. I worked there as an attendant nurse, so I could see all of the, you know, stores moving out and moving into the big mall in Waterford. So when I graduated from high school, I went to work at the police department as a cadet. It was around that time that I got drafted. So I would say this was in around, you know, 65, 66 when I got drafted.
Now, what was going on in Flint around that time?
In Pontiac.
Pontiac, rather, I'm
Right.
sorry. Over here in West Michigan, you start lumping all of them together.
You know, just a quiet town. In 68, of course, they were having a lot of social unrest and a lot of protests and things of that nature. And as I say, I was working at the police department as a cadet. All of a sudden, I got drafted. In fact, in April of 69, they took basically every male black on the south side of Pontiac that was eligible to be drafted, got drafted. I attempted to get a deferment because I was going to college and I was working at the police department. But the chief at that time said that he felt it would be better for me to go into the service. So I really didn't fight it. You know, I went on into the service.
So did it kind of look to you like this particular group getting drafted all at once was sort of a local draft board trying to control the situation?
Right. I felt they were, you know, trying to keep down a lot of social unrest that would go on that following summer, you know, of '69. And I think the best way to do that was to get all the young men out of the city.
Now, what was your view of what was going on? I mean, if you're, a lot of the people who are protesting and so forth, a lot of them are going to be African American, but then you're working for the police at that point. What was that experience like for you, or how did you feel about what was going on then?
Well, you know, it was an experience where you would see the officers in full riot gear, you know, the helmets and the riot sticks and all of this. And, you know, here I am working at the police department as a cadet. You know, I'm doing the normal things a cadet would do at that time. I'm working the switchboard, or, you know, I'm doing fingerprints, a lot of filing. And, you know, it was something that you really didn't broadcast that you were doing, you know, but, you know, I felt that, you know, because I wanted to be a police officer, this was the best way to start, you know. So, you know, I was never one that was, you know, out in the streets a lot. You know, I'd do my job and go home. You know, I really wasn't hanging out, so it really didn't affect me a lot.
Okay. Now, you get drafted. Now, what's the process then for someone who gets drafted? Where do you go? What do you do? How does that work?
Well, the process that I went through is you go down for your first physical, which is induction physical. Then you go back home, and then when they sent a letter saying to go back to Fort Wayne, Detroit, we finished the paperwork. They swore us in, and they told us that they were going to put us up in a hotel in Detroit, and if we were not there in the morning, we would be considered AWOL. That morning, we were put on a plane, and we were shipped to Fort Knox, Kentucky. My first week at Fort Knox, Kentucky, you know, I walked around in civilian clothes, went to the PX, could have a beer. You know, they were drinking that 2.0 beer, .2 beer. You know, I really didn't know what to think of the Army at that point. You know, I was just there.
So they hadn't started any kind of organized drill or training or things like that
No, they hadn't. We had not started our basic training. Then they put us on a bus and took us to the different part of Fort Knox, and all the yelling and screaming and all of that started, and it was run everywhere you go. Do push-ups and pull-ups to get into the mess halls. You know, we just started our normal basic training.
Okay. Do you think the police experience and things kind of help you to deal with the discipline and the organization?
No, no. You know, at that point, you could say that the police department was paramilitary, but, you know, it wasn't affecting me that much, you know, as a cadet. But once, you know, I got into the service, and, you know, you realize that discipline and, you know, is going to be a real part of your life, then things change.
Okay. Now, you're going in there, and it's '69, and the Vietnam War at that point is at its height. Tell me a little bit about the guys who were in training with you, and either were they draftees, did they enlist, did they want to be there, did they not want to be there? What kind of impression did you have of those guys?
I felt it was a lot of people that really didn't want to be there. And then as you know, I got to understand the service, I realized that there were some people there that were National Guard and that they were being trained just like I was, but they would go back home, you know. and I really didn't know what to make of that at that point. It was a situation where you really had to learn to live with other people. Being in a barracks the size of the ones that they have at Fort Knox, you got, 30, 40 people in a barracks, just double bunked, and it just takes a lot to get used to. You have to learn how to really take care of your own hygienes and the area within your living.
Right.
And then they would have things like fire watch where you'd have to get up a certain time of night and stay up for an hour, which would break up your sleep. And, I can say that, for me it really wasn't a lot of sleep, because they were also getting you up early in the morning, and if things didn't go right, you might be getting up a second time during the night, and you just learn to deal with it.
Okay. Now, you were getting a lot of physical training. Were you getting weapons training and so forth as well?
Yes, you would get weapons training, hygiene training, the physical training, just a lot of training, learning how to march, which was really a form of learning how everyone would work together.
Right. Now, are they, at that point, assigning you to particular specializations and things? Do you start to get training that gets more specialized?
No, that happens once you got out of basic. Then you went to your additional training, where that's when you got your MOS. Then you went on to your other training, and mine was in armored recon.
Okay. And so what would someone working in armored reconnaissance have to do?
Well, they would teach you how to drive the personnel carriers and tanks. One of the things you learned was because it was on track, you would do a lot of left foot braking and drive with your right foot. How to replace a track if a track blew off, how to maintain the vehicle, how to watch all your gauges to make sure that your oil and other things and coolant and all of this was up where it should be. A lot of maintenance, how to time the 50 machine guns, which is what you would call a crew serve weapon. Plus you had 260 machine guns that had to be maintained, plus your own weapons.
Now, do you know why you were assigned to armored recon, or was it just something they told you one day and then there you were?
Right. I would have preferred to have went into the MPs or something like that, but I ended up in armored recon.
Okay. Now, now was the specialized training also done at Fort Knox?
Yes.
Okay. So how long in total were you based there?
Through basic and AIT. Then I went to Vietnam.
Okay. But so for about how long did they have you there? It was like a few months, or?
It was I'd say a few months. I went to Vietnam in September of '69.
Okay. Now, did they let you go home first, or did they just ship you?
Right. I came home for I think it was a month, and then I went to Vietnam.
What was it like to go back to Pontiac then after you'd been at Fort Knox for a few months and you'd been living this soldier's life?
It was different. It took a lot of time to try to catch up on, what was going on in the city. Different people had come and gone. It was just a different life. It was different enough where it took a lot to get reacquainted with people.
Mm-hmm.
And then you know, had to go again.
Right, you take off
Yeah.
again. Okay, now, how did they get you out to Vietnam? Did you go to California first?
We went to Fort Dix, New Jersey. We had a layover there. And because we were just laying around, I got assigned to the brig and had to watch prisoners that were in the Army when they went out on details to clean up. I think I did that for a couple days. Then we left Fort Dix, New Jersey. We went up to Washington State. We flew from Washington State to Alaska. Then we went to Japan, Guam, Japan, and then to Vietnam.
Now, were they flying you on military aircraft or civilian ones?
Civilian.
Okay, so when you're flying, making that trip over there to Vietnam, about what proportion of the people do you think on that plane were servicemen?
Everybody.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, what was it like when did you land outside of Saigon or somewhere else?
We landed at Ben Hoa Air Base. When we landed there, you know, I can recall that, you know, it was just hot. It was midday. They assigned us to bunks, and I can remember, you know, getting into this barracks, and there was a guy there. He was a PFC. As I understood it, once you got in the country, you know, everyone became a private first class. So, you know, I watched him, and, you know, this was an old guy. You know, I got in a conversation with him, and he had been in the Army, you know, something like 15 years, and he was still a PFC, you know, like I was. So, you know, I really didn't get into it, but, you know, it sounded like his whole life was in the Army.
Right.
You
Now,
know.
when you got off the plane, what was your first indication that there was a war going on, aside from the fact that you were soldiers?
It was just hot. A lot of people walking around with guns. The realization of being in Vietnam didn't hit me until that night. You know, I can recall taking off, you know, my uniform and boots and socks and getting up in this bunk, and all of a sudden, you know, you heard a loud explosion and sirens going off, and they were telling us to run into this bunker. So out of the bunk I came, into the bunker I went, and you know, I get down in this bunker, and it's full of water and mud, and I got, you know, mud and water oozing through my toes, and you know, it was basically welcome to Vietnam. You know.
So what had happened? Was it a mortar attack?
Right.
Or something
Someone they had set off a mortar attack on the base. You know, after that they gave all clear. You know, and this one fella I had met that was a PFC. You know, just like I was. You know, he said, you know, don't ever do that again. You know, you don't take off all your clothes. You know. He started going through the things that I had, you know, my duffel bag, and you don't need this, you don't need that, get rid of this, you know, all the Army issue stuff that he was telling me you're not going to use over here. And
so what kind of things was he throwing out?
Ponchos, underwear, all the different belts and webbing. You know, he said, you're not going to use this stuff. You know, and he was basically right. You know, it was a type of stuff I didn't use.
Okay. Now, how quickly did they move you out from there? I mean, did you get further training at Ben Hoa, or was that just an air base and they took you somewhere else?
No, I think it was a couple days. I was flown out to the unit that I would be in, it was called Charlie Troop. It was a 3/4 cab unit.
A 3/4 cab unit, what does that mean?
Right, that's what they call it because of the armored vehicles. And on our vehicles, we had a blue triangle to, denote our unit.
Right.
As I saw this unit from the air in the helicopter, they were in circles like covered wagons. You'd have a personnel carrier, then you have a Sheridan tank, then you'd have, and it just went like this in a circle, and you had mortar personnel carrier in the center, along with communication and the CO. I really didn't know what to think of that. I'm thinking, this is just unreal, to see something like that from the air.
Yeah. Now, what else could you see from the air? What was the countryside around there like?
Oh, they were stuck in the rice paddies, but you could see, a lot of the foliage and the jungle and a village. I recall once, you got on the ground and it got night and fellas were telling you, what you needed to do, for the night. We would get rocketed from this village. And this went into the Central Highlands.
Right. Now, when you're moving around in these different parts of the country, how much did you see of the civilian population?
You would pass them. Once we got up into the Central Highlands, we started to deal with what they call the mountain yard people.
And those were people who were not ethnic Vietnamese.
Right.
And in some ways they had gotten along better with first the French and then the Americans.
Right. Very primitive people. Some of them still had crossbows and blowguns. Women would walk around with no tops on, just villagers. We basically got along pretty well with them.
Now, did you have North Vietnamese or Viet Cong active in these areas?
Yeah.
And were they a threat to the villagers as well?
Yeah, they were a threat to everybody, the villagers, us. So you just did what you had to do, to stay safe.
So this situation that you came in on when you first arrived and joined your unit, you had the vehicles parked in the circle and so forth, that was the kind of thing that you continued to do on a regular basis?
Oh, yeah. Every night. Every night where we could set up, that's how we set up. Then what they would do is, hopefully, if weather permitted, they'd helicopter us in a hot meal, at night, and then we would get concerned because the first helicopter would bring in our hot meal, and just about the sun would start to go down. If another helicopter came, then we would basically start to check the rotation, because what would happen is they would have a sniper get off this helicopter. He would go to the CO, and depending on if it was your turn, you would go out and set up a ambush with him, and he would leave us and go do what he had to do. And one night it didn't work out, and we actually ended up getting ambushed. It was just a bad situation. They had to bring in a helicopter gunship with miniguns on it to, get us out of there.
So what had happened then? Had the sniper gone off, and then while you were waiting for him, then you got attacked? Or?
He came back to us, and it was what we call coming back hot. I think whatever he was doing, he didn't do, and he was getting caught.
Mm-hmm.
We got ambushed, and I just think it was, through the grace of God that we all made it back and nobody got killed.
Mm-hmm. Now, as far as you can tell me, what were the snipers doing? I mean, what kind of assignments did they have?
The guy that they usually would send with us, he would never really tell us what
Mm-hmm.
he was doing, They tell us to go out so far and to set up, and then he would
Right.
leave us,
Because it was a period where they had operations where they would assassinate local leaders who were making trouble for them, or if they could identify a Viet Cong commander. Or something
I
like
tend to
that.
think that's what he was there for,
Mm-hmm.
But they would not really give us that information.
Right.
They would tell us to set up, and we'd go out and set up in a semicircle with one guy set up toward the rear, and we would wait on him.
Okay. Now, when you get into trouble, you're in radio contact with
Right.
your unit at that point. About how far away were you from the camp?
Oh my goodness, we'd be, maybe 2 or 3 miles, or what they call 2 or 3 clicks out, and not far enough out where we could get completely cut out,
Mm-hmm.
but far enough out where he could go do what he needed to
Right.
do, and we could still be in communication.
Right. Now, you call in, you get in trouble, you call back, they send out a helicopter gunship. I don't know, how quickly did they get it out?
Our response time with the gunships was, if you called for a gunship, it may be, 20 minutes or so. You could also call in artillery, and when you call in artillery, you could actually hear the artillery coming through the air,
Right.
So,
Right.
It just depended on where we were at and what we were doing, how quick they could get these, like Cobra gunships and, different things to us.
And when there's that few of you, though, how would they even know where to shoot?
What we did that night was we had like a railroad flare, and he told us to strike a flare and put your head down and extend it the length of your arm. And he covered everything that was out in front of these flares, So, it was something to see. You just be happy that he was accurate in what
Right.
he was doing.
Right. Yeah. Now, how often did you have to go out with a sniper and so forth?
We would rotate, he wouldn't come every night, but he would come enough where you'd want to count to see if it was your turn, to go out with him, so.
Okay. Now, you're with a cavalry unit, you're mobile, you're moving around to a certain extent and traveling through the country. How dangerous was that in terms of ambushes, mines, things like that?
A lot of mines, they put mines in the ground, so that, track would go out and run over it. A lot of times in the Central Highlands, they would actually have some blacktop roads. And, we'd get out and have a metal detector, and we'd actually sweep the highway, in an attempt to, locate these mines, and dig them up so, track wouldn't.
Yeah. Now, you couldn't do that all the time and be able to get
no.
anywhere, though.
No.
How did you know where to look or when to look?
Depend on the CO. Because a lot of times, with tracks, we'd be moving, and we'd move fast
Right.
and leave enough space so that if somebody did hit something, it wouldn't take out other people with
Right.
it.
Oh, yeah. How much of a gap would you normally have between vehicles?
Oh, my goodness. as a rule of thumb for me, I used to want at least, 3 car lengths, enough where you could react, but not enough where you would leave the back of someone else's vehicle,
Right.
Open for attack, so, you just did what you had to do depending on how fast you'd be running.
Right. Now, how well did the men in the unit kind of get along with each other as you're out there on patrol and doing these things?
We all got along pretty well, because after all, we were all living together. It was a situation where I used to chuckle, because I used to say Vietnam is the only place that I could guarantee you 2 things. You're going to smell coffee in the morning and you're going to hear country music, no matter where you would be, So, everybody basically in the field got along really well. But when we would go to the rear, for those 3 days, people would kind of go their separate ways and their separate cliques, but when we were out in the field, everybody had to work together, the black guy and the white guy would work together. They'd drink out the same canteen if need be, but when they got back to the rear, everyone would kind of go into their own separate area. The one hooch, community hooch that I stayed in, it was basically the blacks and a couple Hispanics, and I knew there was one white guy that bunked in there, but most of the white guys bunked all together. I don't know if you want to call that racism. I just call it a fact of life. They worked together when they were in the field and basically got away from each other when they went to the rear. So.
Yeah. Well, the Army at this point had been desegregated officially for about 20 years. To what degree would you say there was sort of equality in terms of how it operated, and black people or white people would have kind of the same opportunities or not?
I can say for me, I got as good a training as was necessary for, me to do what I needed to do. You would be aware of the racism, but it was a type of thing where, in Vietnam we all had to work together.
Right.
I didn't spend that much time, stateside. Once I finished my tour in Vietnam, I was fortunate enough to get a position where I could get out and I didn't have to deal with that. I looked at it like, we all got to work together and we all got to live together out here in the field. And, I was happy to get back to the rear, and eventually I was able to get a one-man hooch, so I was able to get myself some privacy and get away from
you sort of have your own sort of hooch, like a cabin or shack or something like that. And that would be on the Cu Chi base, or?
Right, that would be right in our unit in the rear. When we would go to the rear, we had our own unit area. We had our own mess hall, our own showers, our own, outhouses. So you had your own area, where you existed.
Right. So now, did you get any time to go off the base, or did you just go back for a few days, stay there, and then go back out again?
Right. You could go off the bases. They had different villages that may have makeshift bar in it or something like that. You know, if that's what you wanted to do, if you thought you could be comfortable. Then Saigon was only, I think from our base, it was only about 23 miles down Highway 1. So, you know, if you were able to get that kind of a leave, you could go into Saigon. You know, plus you had your you know, your R&R time, where, you know, you were given a week. You could go to Bangkok, Hawaii, you know, different places like that, you know.
Yeah. Did you do any of that yourself? Did you
Right. When I took my R&R, I went to Hawaii. Only problem with Hawaii is we noticed that a lot of the guys would go to Hawaii, walk across the tarmac, get on another plane and come home to the States, which they didn't want you to do. And a lot of these guys would go AWOL, and, you know, the MPs would have to go get them and send them back to Vietnam.
No, they were going back to the States with the idea of not coming back at all?
Right. Yeah.
All right. Now, did you have a lot of Vietnamese working on the base at Cu Chi?
Yes, yes. They would work, you know, depending on the rank of the person, cleaning the hooches. They'd burn a lot of the waste from the outhouses. They would...
they burn waste from the outhouses?
Clean the showers. If you saw somebody, you know, in the army out there cleaning, and or you saw him out there burning the waste, you could rest assured that he had done something really bad. You know, it was a type of detail that was just very unpleasant.
And then did the people on the base have Vietnamese girlfriends and things like that? Or
Yes, yeah.
And was that sort of more common among people just sort of based there? I mean, your guys were out in the field.
Right, it was more common among what we call the rear echelon guys that stayed on the base. You know, because after all, we were gone. Yeah. You know.
Were there security issues on the base? I mean, were there people coming up out of the tunnels and making trouble, or?
They had people that pulled guard. You know, the rear echelons would pull, you know, perimeter guard, and of course you had the MPs and, you know, things of that nature. You know, when I got back, you know, what we called the rear, you know, I was very comfortable. You know, every once in a while the guys might get all liquored up and go to throwing CS gas and, you know, things of that nature. So you kind of slept with your gas mask handy, you know, so.
And did you also have to still deal with things like mortar attacks at night and that sort of stuff, rocket attacks?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes they would, you know, test the, you know, perimeter, or, you know, test the compound. So, you know, you were always aware that that could happen.
Now, did you have much of an understanding yourself of why you were there, or what the Army was there for in the first place?
No. In fact, when I was up in the Central Highlands, and, you know, you're dealing with, you know, all this fighting and death, and, you know, once it got really personal to me, and, you know, I was dealing with a Vietnamese. He had his whole groin shot off, and, you know, was trying to give him aid, and, you know, when it got that personal for me, I felt, you know, why am I really here? And, you know, I really need to do what I got to do to get home. So it understanding why we were there, you know, was something that I'm still dealing with. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's something that I'm still trying to learn with, you know, since I've been away from there and I've gotten through my career in
Mm-hmm.
law enforcement, and then, you know, I went to work for Gentex for 7 years and working in maintenance most of that. Now I got the time to really try and digest a lot of
Mm-hmm.
that and to try to understand it.
What did they tell you at the time? I mean, was there any effort made in the Army to kind of explain to the soldiers what your purpose was there, what the mission was?
We're liberating a people, we're fighting for democracy, and, you know, we're trying to stop the communists. And, you know, for, you know, a person my age, that really didn't mean a lot to me, you know. I guess the best way to sum it up is when 9/11 happened, I asked my daughter, "Are you afraid or are you scared?" And she said, "No, Dad, I live in Zealand."
Mm-hmm.
You see, so what she was basically telling me is, you know, this has happened, but I live in Zealand, so I know I'm safe, you know, and to take a young person like me, you know, out of you know, a city like Pontiac and to stick him in Vietnam and to tell him, you know, democracy and all of that, you know, I'm really not seeing it. I'm seeing somebody trying to kill me and the fact that I need to get back home, you know. I'm dealing with a people that I really don't know and understand, you know. I don't know their culture or what they're really fighting for, you know, but I'm here, so I need to do what I need to do to get back home.
And is that sort of what kept your head on straight? You just sort of stayed focused on that?
Right. You know, it got to an attitude where a lot of us were sitting around in the rear, and the comment was made, you know, we are all here together, and when we leave here, we'll probably never ever see each other again, you know, but since we're here together, we got to work together,
right?
You know, so, you know, that was basically the attitude.
Now, to look back on your time, but how long total did you spend in Vietnam then?
I was there from September 69 to September 70, so that's 13 months.
Okay. Now, on the time we were there other particular events or things that kind of stick out in your mind or that tend to come back into your head that you haven't mentioned here yet?
You know, the tunnels, the one person that, you know, died real personally, you know, with me there, you can hear a smell or, you know, you can hear music. You know, when I was there, you know, I really considered myself blessed. I fell in a punji pit. The stakes broke. I had a guy trip a grenade out of a can at my feet. It didn't go off. We went out on that ambush, didn't get a scratch. Went in the tunnel, really didn't get, you know, hurt. You know, so, you know, I think, you know, in the whole scheme of things, I was blessed, you know, to go over there and to come home. But, you know, the question still lingers as to why I was there, you know, not really understanding why we were there. I find myself now looking at like a lot of National Geographic, they did. I saw something on Cities of the Underworld or Underground,
Right.
which was really good. You know,
Mm-hmm.
my wife was able to sit there and she watched this, and I don't think she really understood what I was doing until she watched, you know, that special on TV to know what was going on, you know, in these tunnels.
Well, and I would think that for an awful lot of people, I mean, the tunnel work in particular would seem awfully frightening. I mean, it's like some kind of strange nightmare where you never exactly know what's around the next corner and so forth.
You don't know.
And when you were in there, there's no light in there, was there? I mean, you had to bring your own.
You know, you had a flashlight. You know, you have to understand that a lot of these places were, you know, just big enough where you could crawl in them. You know, and you have to understand that, you know, back in '69, you know, I was a lot smaller than I am now. You know, so you were able to get into these places. I had someone ask me why was I doing this. I don't know why I was doing it. It was something that I felt was my job to do. You know, so you did your job.
Yeah.
I think the fact that I was in the service, I think it did a lot to build, you know, my character and, you know, my work ethic. You know, I think it did a lot to round me out as to, you know, what I wanted to do with my life. You know, once I left Vietnam, and I came home on leave, you know, I sort of hit the ground running, you know, to find me a job. And back then, they needed police officers, so they had a program where you could get out early, you know, if, you know, you had secured a job as a police officer. So once I got all the paperwork done and was granted the early out, I got out that Friday. That Monday morning, I was sworn in as a police officer and went to work, went to the police academy. You know, it wasn't until I watched a couple of my nephews come back from Iraq that I really understood that they came out of Iraq and got out of the service and drew unemployment. You know, I never did that, you know. And I thought to myself, you know, I got cheated in a way because I should have came out and relaxed like, you know, they did. You know, I really didn't have what, you know, I call the stand down time, you know, the time just to kick back. You know, I went from military right into a paramilitary type of environment, you know, so even sitting here today was something that, you know, several years ago I never would have even done. You know, I never joined, you know, organization like
VFW or one of those.
VFW. I just joined that here about a year ago. You know, when Vietnam was going on, it was a time where you really, I perceived that you really could not be proud of being in the military. There, you know, there was so much protesting going on because of the war. When we flew, you know, like commercial airlines, we used to fly standby, and one of the things that, you know, I would do is once the plane got in the air and they took off the seatbelt sign, I would go into the lavatory and I would put on my civilian clothes because I just simply didn't want to deal with, all the harassment, you know.
So did you get some of that? I mean, if people saw you in the uniform when you were in the States, they...
Right. When I came back, for one leg of that trip, I came through California, and, you had the Heidner Christianers and people protesting, and, I couldn't get into a bathroom quick enough to get out of that uniform. It just makes me feel good now that, your military is, with Iraq and all are being, they're being, given the recognition that we really didn't get,
It might be about the one lesson out of Vietnam we sort of actually learned, which is don't blame it on the soldiers.
Yeah. When you watch, like, Good Morning America, and you watch Nancy Grace, and they recognize a soldier. I don't think that was going on when I was in. As I understand it, all everybody got was a nightly body count. And my wife gave me a hat, and I looked at this hat. I've been really reluctant to wear it because it says something like 45,479 people killed in Vietnam, whatever the number is. And, the number to me is just mind-boggling, to think that, so many of our people got killed over there. So, I'm in a situation now where I'm still learning about Vietnam.
Right.
I'm still learning the history of the war. So, I'm, retired now, but I'm still getting comfortable, with the fact that I went through that.
Right. Now, so when you came back, what kind was the Army kind of offering any kind of support or counseling or anything else like that, or did they just pretty much expect you to go and just go back into civilian life and take care of yourself?
Well, you do. I think they call it ETS. It was so insignificant for me. I really don't remember a lot about it. I know that there was not a lot of counseling and things of that nature, and especially with me, it was.
Because you also did, normally when the people came back from their tours in Vietnam, they'd spend some time in the States, on the base, some kind of duty at home before they actually get discharged.
Right.
And do you think maybe that was a place that allowed people to sort of decompress or sort things out a little bit, that you skipped over, or?
When I came back, as I said, I came back to Fort Knox. And the unit that I came back to were going out and they were doing the military funerals. So, in my mind, that was something that I, didn't need to be dealing with. So, like I say, I was blessed where I was comfortable enough where, I'd do my details and stuff during the week, and, I was close enough to home where I could run, get a leave, and go home. And then when I was able to get out, I just got out.
So basically you still had contacts with the police department back in Pontiac, and they still knew who you were, and were ready to bring you back in?
Right. Well, when I got out, when I came back to Pontiac, I was told that they had instituted where you needed at least an associate degree to be a police officer. So I went out to Oakland University and I got on their Department of Public Safety, and I went to school and I earned my associate, and during that time I went back to Pontiac.
Right.
and because I had already had experience and been to the police academy, I was basically put on the road as a patrol officer.
Now, at the time you joined, how well integrated was the police force in Pontiac?
When I was a cadet, most of the officers there were all white. I think you had enough black officers that you could probably count them on both hands.
And about how large a police force?
It was at least 160, 180 officers. You know, so when I came back the second time, the number of black officers had increased. You know, and I had a good career there.
Yeah, how long did you work for them?
I worked from 73 until 90 when I took early retirement. I worked patrol, youth section. I worked what they call major crimes, where you worked a lot of, you know, like homicides and suicides, and most of the violent crimes.
Right. And did you become a detective in that
Right.
process?
I ended up at the rank of detective. Really worked myself into 2 heart attacks, and I retired. Then I felt, you know, I need a more quieter life, so I moved over here to this side of the state. Got really restless, and I went to work for Gentex. I started on the line, got really interested in, you know, doing like the electrical and building. So I spent, you know, like 3 or 4 years doing, you know, that type of work, and finally it got to the point where, you know, I just felt it was time, you know, to actually retire. So that's what I'm doing now.
Right. Now, again, to look back on sort of the whole thing now, you said a little bit about it here earlier, but how do you think that whole military experience affected you? Sort of, did you kind of grow up that way? Did you become a better person because you did that, or just who you are?
Like I said before, I think it was good for me in some ways and bad in others. I have often said that, you know, if I could have gotten a decent job in the service, I probably would have made a career out of it. I think I think it was necessary, you know, to teach me, you know, how to be a responsible adult, you know, how to have a good work ethic, you know, things of that nature. So, you know, when I look at the young people nowadays, I think, you know, the service in a lot of ways would be really good for some of them. And especially now that it's more of a volunteer type of army, where when I went in, it was not volunteer. You know, this is something that you either did or you got prosecuted for not doing.
Right.
You know, so, you know, I think it helped me a lot once, you know, I started my police career, because, you know, the police department was somewhat paramilitary, you know, so.
And you also had to see a lot of pretty unpleasant stuff.
Right.
Well, it's not a great thing to have to do. You had some practice.
You know, I will say on the police department, I had the best of training, the best of schools. Learned a lot of really good, you know, interviewing and interrogating techniques. You know, the things that the normal patrol officer, you know, wouldn't learn or really wouldn't be exposed to. So I think that, you know, by being in the military, it basically prepared me for what I wanted to do, even though, you know, you had to go and see a lot of unpleasant things, you know, so.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you for coming and talk to us today. It's now getting to be long enough ago when all that stuff was taking place that certainly the college kids that I work with now, I mean, it's like World War II was to me, I guess. It was something that was back there in the past someplace a very long time ago.
Yeah, you know, I said to a young person once, I said, you know, I can remember when we didn't even have calculators. We had slide rules, and he looked at me, what's a slide rule? You know, so, you know, times change, and, you know, hopefully you can go through a bad experience and come out the other end and, you know, at least have a better insight and, you know, be a better person for it.
All right. Well, thank you for talking to us today.
Thank you.
Okay. Just turn off our mics here.